Hola, mi nombre es Russell Keith McGee. Unfortunately, that is all the Spanish I know. Hopefully there is a translation of this talk appearing somewhere down here. I am speaking to you today from Wajak Noongar Boodja, otherwise known as Perth, Western Australia. I hope you're all having a great time at Pipizza Hogin. I wish I could be there in person. I have been involved with the Django Web Framework since about 2006, but I'm here today to talk about my pet project, Beware. I've been working on Beware for quite a while, just over 7 years at this point. So what problem is Beware trying to solve? Well, Python is a really popular programming language. It's a popular teaching language. It's popular for science and data processing, but it's not a toy language. It's got depth. It's also powerful enough to use for serious computing, for high volume web apps, for big data processing. But the modern computing landscape is increasingly mobile. We all carry phones in our pockets and use apps on a daily basis. And even on desktop, people want to have native applications. But while we have all sorts of tutorials out there that will teach you how to build a web app in Python or how to use Jupyter notebooks to do data processing, there haven't been a lot of good examples out there for how to build a mobile application or a native application in Python. Beware is my solution to this problem. It is a set of software libraries that lets you build completely native mobile platforms or native applications, indistinguishable from those being built with platform native tools, plus the tools to deploy those applications to multiple platforms. It does all this from a single Python codebase with tools to make the deployment process as effortless as possible. You can think of it as Django, but for mobile development. And like Django, it tries to make the easy stuff simple and the complex stuff easier. Or to put it another way, it's a collection of Python tools that let you Python all the things. So what does Beware look like in practice? Well, Beware isn't just one tool or library. It's a collection of tools and libraries that all work together. And the best way to explain them is to show you how they're used in practice. So let's imagine we wanted to build an application to help us convert temperatures from Fahrenheit to Celsius. We sketch out a mock-up of what we want to build. It's going to have text input and some labels and a button. When we press the button, the value in the Fahrenheit input will be converted to Celsius, and the second text box with the Celsius label will be updated. So we'll start with a tool, a Beware tool called Briefcase. Briefcase is the Beware tool for packaging applications, but you can also use it to bootstrap a new project. So we create a virtual environment, we pip install Briefcase, and then we run Briefcase new. This walks us through a wizard to start a new project, asks us questions about the name of our application, who the author is, what license we want to use, what GUI toolkit we want to use, and so on. And we answer all those questions, and Briefcase will generate a project layout, a README file, a license file, a pyproject.toml file to contain all our application configuration, and a source directory that contains an empty stub application. Now, this application is fully functioning as is. It just won't do anything particularly interesting. So let's add some functionality. To build out that functionality, we're going to use Toga, which Toga is Beware's cross-platform 100% system-native, Python-native widget toolkit. It is Python native. It is written Python first, so it uses Python language idiom as much as possible. But it's also system native. It doesn't use a theme to pretend it's going to render system native widgets. It uses system native APIs to render system native widgets. So a button on macOS is an NS button. On Ubuntu, it's a GTK button. But because it's Python first, Toga will give you an abstracted Python interface to those native widgets. So here's an example of what our code will look like. We'll import the Toga widget toolkit. We'll define a subclass of toga.app, which will become our application. That application only needs one method for the moment, startup, which describes how to build what our application looks like. What is it going to look like? Well, we want a main window. We're going to give that window the same title as our application, and we'll associate the main window with our application. Then we'll create a display box into which we put all of our GUI content. We'll set that box to be the main window's content. And then lastly, we'll tell the app to display that main window, to show it to the user. Now, I haven't gotten into detail to go through all the details of how we would populate that box with widgets. If you're interested, we do have tutorials that walks you through all that process and more. But the short version, you create widgets. So in this case, we want a text input for our Fahrenheit value. We want a read-only text input for our Celsius value. We want labels and buttons. When the button is pressed, we want to take the value of the Fahrenheit input, do some math to it, or convert it to a float, do some math, and then set the value of the Celsius input. The layout is done with boxes, very similar to HTML. So we define a row box that contains all the Fahrenheit widgets and labels in the order we want them. The row box contains the Celsius labels and widgets, again, in the order we want them. And then we put those two boxes plus the button into a container box, to a column box, which becomes the main application content. Each of those widgets can have style associated with them as well. Style is it's a CSS-like language that lets you set colors and fonts and more. Eventually, we want to replace this with actual CSS. And so now we can run the application. Briefcase has a developer mode that lets us rapidly iterate the application on our current platform. So if we run briefcase dev, that will ensure we have all our necessary dependencies installed and then start the application in our development environment. And if we do that on macOS, we get an app that looks just like a native application. If you're on Linux or Windows, you get an application that looks native there. And it looks native because it is a native application. But it's still just a Python project. We want this to be an actual distributable application. So for that, we go back to Briefcase. We run briefcase create to generate an application stub, things like the project or configuration files that are needed on the platform to define an application. We then use briefcase build to compile that project into an app, and we can then use briefcase run to run our actual application. This is effectively the equivalent of double-clicking on an icon in your file manager. Lastly, we can run briefcase package to generate an installer, a DMG on macOS, an MSI on Windows, and so on. And where required, it will also do code signing, so you can distribute this app and have this sort of safe sandbox environment that some platforms now provide. And if we do this, we end up with a native macOS app on macOS that we can distribute to someone else or submit to the App Store. But if we were on Windows, we would end up with a native Windows application complete with an MSI installer. And if we ran it on Linux, we would get a native Linux application, a GTK application, packaged as an app image, so it should be transferable between machines, even between different distributions. All right, so that's desktop sorted, or desktop application sorted. What about mobile? Well, the packaging process on mobile is a little bit different. We add iOS to all those commands from before. We can say briefcase create iOS, briefcase build iOS, briefcase run iOS. And when we run, what we'll get is a native iOS application running on the iOS simulator on your laptop, ready to be, and it could potentially be uploaded to the iOS App Store. And if we do it on Android, briefcase create Android, briefcase build Android, briefcase run Android, we get a native Android application running in the emulator, ready to be uploaded to the Google Play Store or distributed as an APK. So what's the current status of the Beware project? Well, it's not version 1.0. It's not ready for production use. Most of the tools are version 0.3. It's a solid proof of concept. We've proved that we've solved the major technical hurdles, getting Python to work on multiple platforms, displaying a user interface with native widgets on a common code base, deploying to each of those platforms with single command deployments. Those are the solved problems. They're also the hard problems. We've got Beware apps in the iOS and Android app stores as proof that this is actually a viable development mechanism. What is left is to flesh out all the individual APIs, to develop Toga APIs for all the advanced features on your modern phones. Beware tools are all Beware licensed open source projects. We've had over 400 contributors at this point. Lots of those contributors made their first contribution to open source at one of the sprints that we were able to attend. And as the ultimate eat your own dog food proof, I am giving this presentation today using a Beware tool. This slide deck has been given using a tool called Podium. It is a native Beware application written in Python for presenting Markdown-based slide decks. It runs on macOS and GTK, and we're very, very close to getting it to run on Windows as well. We're just missing a couple of features in Toga. So that's Beware. Now, I've only shown you the surface here. There are lots of other Beware projects behind the scenes that support what Briefcase and Toga does. If you would like to support my work and the community's work on the Beware project, you can join the project as a financial member. You can also back me on GitHub sponsors. Or if you want to contribute code or documentation or translations, please get in touch. Beware did recently receive a grant from the PSF to improve our Android support, but for the most part, we're a volunteer project and we need as much help as we can get. So that's Beware. I hope you try it out. If you've got any questions, you can reach me by email or on Twitter, or I'm usually lurking in the Beware Gitter chat rooms. Thank you very much for having me, and enjoy what's left of the pizza.